Hi guys, I think I'm going to start. We have some exciting presentations, so we're just going to go for it. Welcome to one of the last sessions for Urban October 2021, the Rebuilt City. Today, myself and two other speakers, Thozama Muta and Tessa Chittenden, will be co-hosting the session on new landscapes towards a greener urban future. And today, more than ever, we are experiencing profound social, political, economic, and environmental challenges, which have been catalyzed by the global pandemic. Wildfires, increasing global temperatures, floods, and storms have amplified social suffering, particularly to the most vulnerable areas. Thus, the way we plan, build, and manage our cities is crucial for our collective future and calls for an urgent response that addresses socio-economic development, climate change, and biodiversity. So in this session, we will be unpacking 3 research projects that address the importance of our natural environment and urban landscapes on our ever-urbanizing world. Each speaker focuses on a different angle of this topic, but all recognize the value of a greener future. So each presentation is between 10 to 15 minutes in duration, and we will open the floor to some questions and welcome a discussion around this topic afterwards. So before we start, we ask that everyone please keeps their mic on mute until the floor is opened. And you may post any questions or comments in the chat box below, and we will do our best to attend to them. So please welcome the first speaker, Thozama.
Hi, thank you for that introduction. I will now share screen. Oh, okay. Thozama and, oh, what happened now? Sorry about that. My name is Thozama, and on the 30th of September, posted a post on their Instagram, at the Lone Power Station, what is next? And I was
Thozama, you're breaking away. I think she's just, you're not sharing your screen anymore, and your voice is breaking away a little bit. I'm not sure if anyone else is experiencing that.
Hi, I had a comment from Zoom, but I think I'm back now, and hopefully everything is
you're back.
in order. Thank you. Sorry about that. And is everything good to go?
Yes, we can see your screen now. Cool.
Cool. Thank you.
Can we just ask everyone to keep their mics on mute until later?
Thank you. So our Future Cities posted on the Instagram page on the 30th of September at Lone Power Station, what next? And this reminded me of my dissertation topic, where I explored creating place through pattern, integrating and exposing layers of analysis, expression, and experience through art. I had always kept my art making and my landscape understanding separate. So this was the opportunity for me to really merge the two, which I really enjoyed. Wetland Power Station is situated along the N2 in Cape Town, where the cooling towers were once located. They were operational for about 40 years before being demolished in 2010, a real landmark to the city. This topic really has gotten so many people commenting, interested, often always cartoons released on these cooling plants. And while I was reflecting on my dissertation, I came across this industrial archaeology and heritage blog by David Wood. There's so many topics still online. From 2014, posts have been shared. People have been very active. So from 2009 up until 2016, really discussing this redevelopment and what next. It's uniquely located within Cape Town. We where the site is hugged by Pinelands, Langa, Athlone, and also the Q-Town wastewater treatment. The towers being the most visible landmark often always got people thinking that the smell coming from Q-Town wastewater treatment plant was from the towers. And so this memory often lingers. On site is located the Athlone Refuge Transport Station. And I like how the play of words occurs here with it being called the arts. The arts is where waste is transferred to the Visselhoek landfill site by rail, and also where then waste is also then sorted within recyclable material being separated and transferred to another site. With this recycling taking place on site, it really got me thinking about the opportunity to waste to energy, renewable energy still to be located on site and perhaps further expanded. The site lies in close proximity with the initiation site, which is a cultural practice which takes place, sporting grounds of the Langa, and then these three distinct neighborhoods, which is Pinelands, Langa, and Athlone. Pinelands is one of the first garden cities of South Africa, and it was created also in response with the Spanish flu in 1918, where living conditions were really focused on, and also, you know, how do we improve people's living conditions? It's a white neighborhood with your trees-lined streets, easy access to schools, walking distance, your thatched roof, picket fences, and lawns, which is in contrast to then Langa. Langa is the Black township, also one of the first in South Africa, very significant in the struggle of apartheid, where Black people were placed in townships and had to be confined and remain, even curfew was put in place. A significant event took place on the 30th of March, 1960, where people were protesting against the passbook rule, the passbook law, where Black people had to carry the passbook. As we can see, the towers are very evident in this photograph, where people are making their way 14 to about 16 kilometers to the city center. Langa today is still a vibrant neighborhood. There are still issues and struggles when it comes to infrastructure and housing, but it's a place of cultural significance. Brenda Fassie, one of our superstars, who's unfortunately since passed, is from Langa. People travel into Langa to experience the food cooked out on the fires, and also music has become a big part where people come to enjoy themselves over the weekends. Even from outside Langa, they've been able to attract locals from the city of Cape Town and beyond to really come see and enjoy the neighborhood. Athlone as well, the colored neighborhood, is in close proximity to site, which is great significance as well during the apartheid struggle. The Trojan Horse Massacre took place in 1985 when high school children were protesting against the laws of apartheid. Art has been really played an important role with the community building. Ward Council in 2019 saw its significance, where the local food again is celebrated by a mural celebrating the Gatsby. The process of art also allowed me to really understand the site and to explore it. It's a large site with many challenges, but being able to draw, being able to look at its timeline, to see what effect having these towers and then losing them had on site was an interesting process. Art was also a process for me then to identify and celebrate the uniqueness of each neighborhood surrounding site, because I do believe we need to also provide places where we can really showcase our unique culture. I explored the movement patterns, vegetation patterns of the site through perspective drawings, just really trying to understand what makes this place unique. And when I do then put an intervention in place, it's true to site. There's many studies on the site, and that was very helpful then to feed back into the design process. Recognizing that the arts, the refusal site needs to remain on site, and that there's an opportunity for park and urban agriculture to take place because of the accessibility of water on site. Because the site is within close proximity to rail and road, there's a great opportunity for then a transport interchange to take place on site, and also then to continue the light industrial and a public space network to bring these spaces together. I was able then to transpose the artwork I created from an analyzing site, placing it back onto site, which is a very interesting process to really then starting to bring together so many different elements, unique elements from existing buildings, transport lines, boundaries. I really enjoyed this process. When these lines came together, I saw opportunities where connecting could take place, enhancing what's on site, celebration that could take place within existing buildings that are no longer used, and transcending. How do you transcend into site? I really do think there needs to be the memorialization or the acknowledgement of those existing towers that were on site. Within the buildings, the use of the central square and central spaces, or perhaps public spaces. We're looking back at the history of the city of Cape Town. There's definitely an opportunity for residential and commercial purposes, and just a way to explore how do we look at housing in a new and unique way. Where water is present on site, as I said, wetland and urban agriculture would definitely take place. I think when we speak about housing development, this is really a site where it gives us, there's so much potential to learn from what we've been doing incorrectly, and then new ways to address the housing crisis. Housing residential blocks were kept to a minimum levels, 1 or 2, keeping with the site surroundings and conditions. When reading up and speaking about this site, often what comes in conversation is that this is the new Melrose Arc or the new waterfront. I think it's more than that. I think it's an opportunity for a new precedent to take place, celebration to take place, looking back at our history, acknowledging what was done, and then, looking to the future, and definitely adding that renewable energy component. The design that takes place on site should be a multi-use development, but having open space as an open space network as how components come together. I think commercial activity then can be tucked within these spaces, and yes, a real celebration of Cape Town. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thozama. That was great. I think we're going to wait to answer some of the questions at the end of the 3 sessions. I think let's hand over to Tessa.
Hi, thanks for the introduction, Tessel and Thozama. That was a beautiful presentation. And I'm looking forward to presenting my dissertation work. It's actually currently in progress, so I don't have as many beautiful drawings as Thozama has, but I'm just looking forward to presenting the spatial concept I've co-produced with the PHA campaign. So personally, I'm inspired by the notion of regenerative development, which is, it aims to go beyond sustainable development. And for me, the crux of sustainable development is this kind of trade-off approach. It sees like humans as inherently destructive on the environment, and it seeks to minimize our impact. Whereas regenerative development looks at how can humans interact with the environment in such a way that they restore it and regenerate it and have a net positive impact on the environment. So that's just a bit of background on my ethical standpoint. And this project emerged from a period of vacation work in 2020, where I volunteered as an urban planning consultant for the PHA food and farming campaign. And they're a group of activists and small-scale farmers who are working tirelessly to combat the threat of urban development encroachment on the Philippine farmlands. And they came up with a really exciting spatial concept, an alternative spatial concept for safeguarding land from development encroachment, which they have termed the living urban edge. And I was really inspired by their ideas and the immense planning knowledge that exists on the ground. And I think that the role of planners really is to elevate these ideas that emerge on the ground. So I decided to take that forward for my urban planning dissertation. So just some context on the site. It's actually surprising how few people know where the Philippine horticultural area is, or that it even exists. But it's a large tract of farmland embedded in the Cape Flats district of Cape Town. And it provides between 50 to 80% of Cape Town's fresh produce. And it's approximately 20 kilometers southeast of the Cape Town CBD. And so it's extremely well located at the metropolitan scale. And the fact that it's so well located and is open space has placed it under immense development pressure, especially since we're facing such a monumental housing crisis in Cape Town. So why is preserving the PHA as farmlands important? Well, the first obvious reason is for food security. So as I've previously mentioned, it provides a large portion of Cape Town's fresh produce. And then also just with the COVID-19 pandemic, we've really seen the fragility of the globalized food system and the need for affordable and resilient food sources in times of economic crisis. So not only does the PHA provide a large quantity of Cape Town's food, this food is also affordable because it's produced in the city, and as such, transport costs are extremely low. And farm workers are also given between 2 and 5 kilograms of excess produce daily. And much of this produce is sold by small informal traders. So the area also supports local livelihoods. The PHA also lies over the Cape Flats aquifer, as you can see in this map. And the Cape Flats aquifer has been estimated to be able to provide up to 30% of Cape Town's potable water needs. And with the threat of low rainfall and drought, we know that this is essential. And maintaining open space over the aquifer is essential for its ability to recharge. So if the PHA is paved over, it's going to destroy the entire water system. And as indicated on this map, the PHA is also a rare sort of oasis of green space in the Cape Flats. So these maps show the distribution of green space across Cape Town. And you can see the PHA really is like one of the only green spaces in the Cape Flats. And yeah, again, we've seen with the COVID-19 pandemic just how important access to nature is for both mental and physical health. So policymakers have for a long time acknowledged this value of the PHA, and they've acknowledged that it should remain agricultural land. And generally the planning tool which is used to maintain land as agricultural land is called an urban edge. And an urban edge is basically a line beyond which urban development cannot pass. And as you can see on this timeline, the first time that the PHA was protected with a line was in 1967. And then just going through this timeline, you can see at various stages in various spatial planning policy documents, the PHA is acknowledged as land that needs to be protected. So we can see that there's sort of been a long-standing policy consensus that this area needs to be protected. But despite this, as is clear on this map, which shows the gradual erosion of the PHA footprint over time, despite this policy consensus, it isn't really happening in practice. The PHA isn't being protected. And my dissertation started to explore why this is the case. So the first issue that arose was the fact that the urban edge is implemented from the top down. So the result is that the power of implementing the urban edge is concentrated under a single body of politicians who are arguably fallible to economic interest groups and short-term political gains. The result is that often environmental protections like the urban edge are sidelined and constantly amended to allow for lucrative developments that are going to bring better rates and taxes or income for the city. So two high-profile examples of such developments are the Oakland City development and the U-Vest development, which are two large developments which push to rezone the farmlands for urban use. The PHA campaign activists have been battling this ongoingly. That's not a word, sorry. They've been battling this through the legal route, but this is obviously exhausting their financial resources and it's time consuming. And despite the fact that they have been battling these large developments, small developments still go through on the edge, smaller rezonings, a lot of them on this edge of the PHA, hence gradually eroding the PHA's footprint. And then another major issue that came up in my research lies in a lack of proactive spatial planning for the urban-rural interface, which is basically just the space in between urban and rural land. There are few guidelines within the planning literature as to how to manage the relationship between urban and rural land, beyond acknowledging that these land uses often come into tension. But despite this tension between urban and rural land use, there's also an immense opportunity in the space, in this interface between urban and rural land, to reconnect people with the origins of their food and also reconnect people with nature. But this opportunity is missed. As you can see on this aerial photograph of the PHA, there isn't really any kind of transition space between the urban and the rural. There's just sort of a hard boundary and you go from urban to rural. And then there's also a lack of sort of a visual gateway indicating where the farmlands are. So as you can see in this image, which is a street level view of this road, sort of just random. You can't see that you're entering a big area of farmlands. It kind of just looks like an open field maybe. So as such, this kind of perpetuates the lack of visibility of the PHA in the city. As I've previously mentioned, very few Cape Townians know it even exists. And then I went on to argue in my dissertation that this poor spatial definition and this lack of proactive planning at the urban-rural interface allows illegal land uses, such as illegal dumping, to slip through the cracks unnoticed. And in addition to illegal land uses, developers often purchase properties on the edge in the hope that the area will be rezoned for urban development. And this speculation leaves farmlands to lie fallow. Arguably, if the edge were better defined spatially and visually, it would be easier to detect land uses which threaten the character of the farmlands. Also, the lack of any activity in the urban-rural interface allows for criminal activity to occur. So the theft of farm equipment and produce is a huge issue threatening the viability of farming in the PHA. So how can we proactively respond to these shortcomings? In response to the political complexities of top-down implementation, bottom-up planning offers a more resilient approach to safeguarding land. Arguably, communities, and especially mobilized communities such as the PHA campaign activists, are more likely to act in the broader public and ecological interest than political elites might do. Thus, the living urban edge concept aims to embed people in the environment in a symbiotic relationship. This epitomizes the notion of regenerative design that I mentioned at the beginning, where instead of separating the urban and the rural and separating people from the environment with a harsh line, dynamic interaction is encouraged. Creating this relationship also responds to a lack of positive planning at the urban-rural interface. So how can this be done? So the living urban edge concept envisions the establishment of a consolidated and clear boundary of small-scale farms along the PHA edge, as you can see in this conceptual diagram. The small-scale farms can create a barrier in defense of the core PHA farmlands and better define land use in this currently ambiguous space by creating a legible transition between urban space and large-scale farms. This creates an urban edge which is active and alive through embedding people and activity in the landscape. Small-scale farming plots on the edge also break up large tracts of land, hence making the edge more defendable. And this having people present at the edge allows for the passive surveillance of the farmlands to deter crime. The idea is that these small-scale farms could be unified under something called a community land trust, which I'll call a CLT. And CLTs work by purchasing land on behalf of the community and holding it in trust in perpetuity. This can be used in the case of the PHA in order to ensure that small-scale farms, which make up the living urban edge, maintain the character of the area and continue to be used primarily for farming. CLTs are governed by residents and thus epitomize the bottom-up safeguarding of green space. Certain land use principles and guidelines are attached to the title deed of land parcels within the CLT. For example, a rule in the CLT could be that the land has to be farmed using organic principles, which in turn can help protect the aquifer. Okay. And then here's just a more sort of detailed conceptual diagram indicating the concept. So for those who don't know the jargon, a gateway is an element of urban design which sort of functions as an entrance point or a transition between two spaces. So for example, at a gateway point, a public farmers market could be established for selling the produce produced by the small scale farmers who make up the living urban edge. So the idea is really to activate this edge and sort of draw people into the PHA. And then the idea of porous boundaries, so like inspired by the permeable membranes which are found in nature, is central to the idea of the living urban edge concept. So whilst we want to define the urban-rural interface with a clear boundary, we don't want to perpetuate separation. Instead, we want to invite people into the PHA so that it's celebrated in the city. And the hope is that if it's celebrated, it can enhance the public will to conserve it. Then here's just some initial drawings that I've done to sort of illustrate how the concept would look in space. As I said, it's still very much a work in progress. And yeah, just to wrap up, in a rapidly urbanizing world faced with the existential threat of climate change, it is essential that green space is safeguarded. So we really need to come up with imaginative approaches for safeguarding land from development encroachment. And the hope is that this living urban edge concept can inspire other cases. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tessa. I just want to remind everyone to please put your mics on mute until we open up for the discussion. I will be sharing my screen now. Great, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Cool, thank you. My name's Tessel. I'm an urban and biophilic designer by trade, and I currently work at ICLEI Cities Biodiversity Centre in Cape Town on the Cities with Nature initiative, which I will take some time to introduce. Cities with Nature is a unique platform that recognizes and enhances the value of nature in and around cities across the world. It provides a shared platform for cities and their partners to engage and connect, working with shared commitments towards a more sustainable urban world. Cities with Nature enables cities and their partners to realize the value of nature through nature-based solutions, ecosystem restoration, biodiversity conservation, and other approaches. Cities can access tools and resources, show their commitments to act for global nature goals, and their knowledge and experiences. So we currently have more than 190 committed cities from 58 countries around the world on the platform, and we are growing fast. And some of the partners include ICLEI, IUCN, Cities for Forests, WWF, UNEP, the Nature Conservancy, and a few more. And to learn more about this initiative, you can access the platform. I'm going to add a link into the chat now, or feel free to contact me with any questions. Let me just find how I can access the chat. Okay, it seems that I can't paste, but I will do so after my presentation. Today I will be presenting my research for my master's thesis, which addressed the problem of water sensitivity in Cape Town. I obtained my master's degree in urban design and city planning from the Bartlett in London in 2018. And I explored the viable solutions through integrative design, planning, and management. The complementary strategies of retrofitting and rewilding were tested as solutions to enhance sorry, can I just ask, thank you, to enhance Cape Town's porosity and thereby tackle three important issues concerning the spatial, the environmental, and the social amenity. So I first looked at the problem, which is water sensitivity, and urban water sensitivity is the result of various anthropogenic activities. Cape Town is defined as a water sensitive city and was threatened by a severe drought at the time I wrote my thesis in 2017-2018. And this diagram illustrates the differences between three hydrological cycles. So the natural precipitation model, conventional urban drainage system, which we could say Cape Town is such a city, and then the ideal model, which is a sustainable system. So water quantity and thus its access are reduced as a result of changes in climate. Poor planning and design does catalyze this problem in cities, and the design of conventional water systems has ensured that there's an increase in runoff water, which is treated as wastewater, as opposed to a natural hydrological cycle, which encourages increased infiltration into the earth. So Cape Town's water sensitivity and the drought in 2017-2018 was partly self-inflicted, and Cape Town does not plan, design, or manage its water resources sustainably. So during my site visits and research, I observed many situations like these, where there were pipes leading to nowhere, a lack of conveyance, proper infrastructure for the conveyance of water, polluted water sources. So the problem triggered an interest to find an urban design solution in expanding cities, not just Cape Town. And this research thus aimed to achieve 6 general objectives on the premise to assist in mitigating water sensitivity in urban areas, to increase biodiversity and enhance social amenity. And the main objectives included mitigating water sensitivity by reusing grey water and creating a new purpose for wastewater through water sensitive urban design, retrofitting urban infrastructure for biodiversity, reconnecting people and water as supporting arising communities, shifting from grey to green as a response to infrastructure demands, creating sustainable environments by reintroducing nature back into the built environment, and fostering resilient cities through more strategic design methods, and in my case, retrofitting and rewilding. So this presentation is very much a summary of my findings. I guess all three speakers have the same problem, that we've really struggled to fit our whole research into 10 to 15 minutes. And this diagram, this conceptual diagram provides an overview of my research. So really focusing on water quantity, biodiversity, and amenity, envisioning to create more porous public spaces through water sensitive urban design. So to summarize, the project targeted 3 areas, which was the spatial. The first problem we found in the spatial is that urban water sensitivity has been catalyzed by poor planning, design, and management of water, and disregards sustainable conservation. And so the solution I proposed was to mitigate water sensitivity by retrofitting sustainable urban drainage systems. The second was the environmental, of which the problem is that there is an abundance of impervious spaces, a lack of green network, and very much isolated public spaces where water is an issue for urban greening. So my solution is to increase biodiversity and ecology through rewilding strategies. And rewilding might seem antithetical for a water sensitive city, but rewilding specifically uses the local flora species that survive in water scarce environments and essentially optimize drainage porosity and improve public spaces. And then lastly, social amenity, of which the problem is that there is an abundance of open spaces that have not been activated optimally. Abundance of parking lots, disused and unkempt pockets of land, and city squares that are empty and unsafe. So people really travel from destination A to B and rarely dwell in these intermittent spaces. So much of the foreshore today is a result of modernist planning principles, and many of which created harsh, inhospitable environments with very little consideration in creating desirable public spaces for everyone. And so my solution that I proposed was to repurpose these disused spaces to activate them and enhance the social capital. So I subsequently created a toolkit, which I tested based on my literature review, research, and design prototypes. The toolkit was tested on various urban typologies, and scales included buildings, streets, communities, commercial spaces, and cities. And just to illustrate, I looked at what sustainable urban drainage typologies could be applied to different scales, and how this could be integrated with rewilding strategies using native species. This would mimic a natural drainage system and a circular hydrological cycle, meaning it could become a safe, self-sustaining ecosystem that stores water for reuse. And then this is just an example of the commercial property. I then created a design proposal that could be applied to Cape Town at 3 scales, including the city scale, which is more macro level, neighborhood scale, and site scale. And I first identified the existing underground water conveyance in Cape Town, which follows the contours of the mountain. I then identified the green open spaces and parks, of which there are not many. And although Cape Town has been identified as the most biodiverse city in the world currently, I found that in the urban areas, this was not the case. So I proposed to create 2 green buffers that mimicked Cape Town's topography, meaning that the water conveyance from the slopes of the mountains would flow towards the sea, but would meet 2 main green buffers that absorb this runoff water. Underground conveyance would ideally be taken to and stored at the existing wetlands or other peripheral green sites. In between each green buffer would be a smaller intervention and a network of sustainable urban drainage systems that collect and store grey runoff water, activate public spaces, and thereby create porous spaces for all. Porous public spaces, sorry. And so this strategy would not demolish or remove anything per se, but would build on the existing structure of the city. The neighborhood scale zooms in and takes a closer look at the city bowl, and I recognize this network of public spaces, which, as I mentioned before, is a result of modernist city planning in Cape Town. And it has left us with disused spaces, unsafe spaces that people don't dwell in these intermittent spaces. But what if we created a network between these spaces that by rewilding them? So the blue lines show where small scale sustainable urban drainage system typologies could run. The dotted green line indicates what would be turned into green streets, enhancing these streets with street trees, for example. And the larger green line is where this secondary buffer would run. So in a very conceptual visualization, this is what was envisioned. And so the site scale, which is Pier Place, it's a square in the foreshore area. It was proposed to be used as the site scale concept. The site scale functions as a pilot project that can be implemented in other small spaces around the city. And for those of you who have not been here yet, there are some trees, but it's otherwise it's pretty impervious and surrounded by empty parking lots with no ground activation, as you can see in these images. So I proposed opening up the space and implementing a pocket wetland, which would function as a catchment zone for runoff water in the city and surrounding buildings in this foreshore area. The pocket wetland would also attract foot traffic and would become a space for recreation. And we know this works because it has already been done at the towers in Cape Town. For those of you who work in the CBD, I'm sure this is an area you go and grab your lunch. Square One Landscape Architects integrated stormwater management strategies with a sheltered network of green infrastructure to provide respite from the exposed foreshore context. As Cape Town is a water-stressed environment, they designed sustainable urban drainage systems. Rainwater is harvested from the roofs of the parking garage and is stored in tanks to irrigate the expansive green facades that span the sides of the building. So we know this is possible in a water-sensitive city. It's just about managing and designing correctly, and thus enhancing the space. And so here are some conceptual sections of Pier Place that I envisioned, which originally showed scale measurements and the specific type of native flora that could be applied for optimal output. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope this inspires some and reminds us of the importance of green spaces and green infrastructure for our future cities around the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tessel. I also need to just apologize, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Thozama Muta, I'm a landscape architect. We have a few minutes left, and anyone is welcome to please ask any questions in the question box. If you want to unmute your mic, you may do so too. Any questions or any comments are welcome. Thank you.
I've got a reflection just on Tessa's research.
Thank you.
Just to say,
Sorry,
I think
Tessa,
yeah. Just to say, yeah, well done. Thank you for presenting. That's awesome. And something that I've been thinking about a lot. I also work with small scale farmers who are in the Philippines area, and one of the struggles that they have, especially towards moving towards being organic, is that the commercial farms within the PHA are not are not actually farming.
Sorry, Amy,
A
you
lot of them
seem
aren't
to be
farming
breaking
organically.
up. Am I the only one?
No,
Yeah.
I think you're breaking up.
Sorry, it seems my connection's a little bit unstable. Yeah, that was just a reflection to say that we need to make sure that there's an organic narrative being pushed across the PHA, not just among small scale.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And just to respond to that, part of the whole living urban edge concept is to sort of incentivize farmers to adopt organic principles. And one of the ways to do this is through planning law. So one of the things that I looked at was implementing an aquifer protection overlay zone, which has been done in Munich and Lebanon. And basically part of the overlay zone would be to sort of hold farmers in the PHA to organic principles, because if they continue to use chemical fertilizers, the Cape Flats aquifer is going to be destroyed. So yeah, very important what you're saying. And there needs to be a lot more thought into how to, incentivize organic farming.
Any more questions from anyone? It's a safe space, everyone, so please ask away. It can just be a comment, reflection, or anything. But in the meantime, I have a question for all three panelists. Something that I've always been fascinated about is, we as geographers, urbanists, landscape architects do the work and the research, but the question always remains, how do we actually implement it in reality and practice? So just quickly from all three panelists, and this is a hard question, how do you see yourself then trying to get your work, your evidence-based work implemented into practice? Is it for private practice? Is it becoming political? Is it through soft power? How do you guys see actually, because from all talks, this desire to actually do something about this, because we understand the urgency, water crisis, unemployment crisis, the list goes on and on. So yeah, I would love to hear from all three panelists. And then anyone, please ask any questions.
Thank you. I'll go first. It takes a lot of advocating, a lot of discussion, making people aware of what you do, how you do it, where do you fit in a team, and what value you bring into a team and a project. I think when you're studying, you are way more optimistic about the change you can make, and then reality hits once you're working. But it's small platforms like this that are then very encouraging and inspiring, especially then seeing what work we all do, not just the work you're doing, but what peers and colleagues are doing. So yeah, I think it's just keeping the conversation going, not being afraid to introduce yourself to other people outside the built environment who have an impact, who can then go on and introduce you to others. And educating others as well, because I think many people aren't aware of the difference they can make. Yeah, so that's been helpful. Thank you.
I can jump in.
Before I give it over to Tessel,
yeah.
I just a very interesting comment from yeah.
Yeah, I see you're also drawing attention to Nobu's comment in the chat, so I can add to that. So yeah, I just want to also echo what Thozama was saying about values. So I think the first sort of step is shifting the paradigm, shifting sort of the narratives and the values within, how decisions are made. And then just in terms of the living urban edge concept I put forward, as I said, it was only a 4-month dissertation, so I couldn't go too much into detail with implementation. But one of the ideas that I had is that the PHA is really an ideal testing site for small scale agricultural land reform. and reimagining the approach that we currently have to land reform, with sort of handing over large commercial farms in far-flung rural areas. So I considered maybe the living urban edge could be incorporated as part of the land reform process. Maybe also a housing process, so reimagining how social housing is provided, because apartheid didn't only dispossess people of housing, it also dispossessed people of food sovereignty, the ability to grow their own food, access to nature. So there are, of course, many ways to explore this, but yeah, there's always going to be political hurdles, and I think that's just a reality of operating as an urbanist. Yeah, thank you.
Planning is political. Tessel, what's your take?
I'm really glad you asked this question. I think it's something that I, that's really important to me. I think I realized during my master's, having graduated in anthropology and sociology in my undergraduate, and really understanding the importance of communities and people and how people deal with space, and then going into urban design and planning and being presented with these macro scale strategic plans, and realizing, how we actually going to implement this. So I think I was quite aware of that position that practitioners in the urban built environment have, in terms of conceptualizing these ideas, but not realizing them to the extent that we would envision. And I think writing my thesis, I was very aware of my position studying in London and using Cape Town as my case study grounds, and using this to explore the possibilities, but being quite maybe romanticizing the idea to an extent. So I think Nobu's question is very relevant for this, and it's a question I asked myself throughout my thesis a lot, like how would this be implemented? I think Cape Town is a very unique environment in terms of how these processes are realized, and I think there's something that perhaps all built environment practitioners should learn is these macro scale projects are often not realized in their full capacity, and that's why I'm very much for incremental design, taking these into smaller phases, phasing them out in smaller, more like digestible chunks, as opposed to looking at as how are we going to transform the whole city in one go. And then I suppose in terms of like budgetary requirements, that's something that's extremely complicated, and I suppose being able to work for an employer that has the power to change. It's, as Thozama, I want to tap into what Thozama's said, it's always advocating for these changes. And I think the three of us, what we have in common is that we're not, I believe that the proposals we've put forward are not, demolishing massive sites. It's really small scale implementation and working together towards a sustainable future for the city. So I understand I haven't answered the question in full, but that's what I would envision.
It's always hard. I mean, you need lighthouse projects, and that's the way to go about. And I mean, just a comment from Laura saying, so thrilled to see 3 women inspiring, taking the future of our cities into their hands. And I might add to Nobu's comments, maybe a response to this is also the cost you'll save through green infrastructure as opposed to hard infrastructure. So it might be a lot of costs up front, but the cost you'll save down the end, and of course, ecological social benefits, which we also need to monetize. But a good question from Lauren was, so from your experience, because we all are looking at the city of Cape Town, the metropolitan, to what extent is the city open to these ideas? Have you guys explored that, or through your own practice or lived experience? I know 4 minutes remaining, But what's your take? I'm going to go to Tessa first.
Me. Yeah. So I guess I'd say they're going to have to be open to these ideas. So in the case of the PHA, these developments that have been pushed through that threaten the character of the area, they're continually being pushed against, and it's clearly just it's going to be difficult to pursue harsh urban development in the PHA. So they're going to need to, yeah, developers and the city are going to need to come up with compromises. Yeah, they just don't really have an option at this stage. But yeah, it's difficult to say as a student that hasn't really entered the political space what the city's open to. I mean, I would hope that they would be, given climate change and droughts and all the threats we're facing.
It's a hard question. No one's expect you to answer that. Thozama, I'll go to you. From your point of view, is the city of Cape Town open to these ideas or not?
I would think they don't have a choice. They have to be open. I think what's also important to note is that there is so much research already out there. There is forums, there's discussions, there's been public participation. I think instead of always starting the process from scratch, we need to tap into the resources readily available and build onto that. I think also we have infrastructure already. As I mentioned, there is the refuge site on the site I explored. How do we look at expanding what's already existing? You do find some individuals who I think sometimes when you're young, they seem really intimidating in a meeting, but through conversation and being persistent and, not letting that squash your voice, they do end up listening. So yeah, lots of people are open to our ideas.
We're a young country, and as young practitioners and a new lineage of planners, we need to be persistent and know that we're not alone, where there's collective and there's lots of discussions happening in Cape Town and across the country, indeed the continent. Tessa, from your experience, I know your work with local governments across South Africa, are cities open to these ideas?
I mean, I agree with Thozama and Tessa in saying that they have to be. So if they have a personal, will, and they see these ideas and they're inspired by them. But unfortunately, Cape Town or South Africa as a whole is not in a position to prioritize ideas like this that we have proposed, because it's not a priority for a city like Cape Town. So there's other more pressing spatial issues. And that's a sad fact, because I believe next week is COP26, which is the big climate conference. And South Africa, what are we really doing towards climate change? I think it's time that we all, whichever company or organization we work for, the government, that we come together to make this a priority. I would say it's just as much as a priority as other spatial issues, and we need to make room for that. But yeah, as I said, I don't think it is a priority.
This is a very nice segue into George's kind of comment, is that, while we are urbanists and we know what to do, both society and governments at large are not taking it seriously, despite the multitude of crises. So how can individuals, how can society other than urbanists get involved? Whether it's, how do we do that, and how do we approach that? Anyone who wants to answer that?
I will go. I think sometimes you just even relate it to movies. In any discussion you have, if you see something in movies and documentaries you watch daily, and songs and music, see where we've come from, see how we can move forward. Keep up, be proactive, read, bring it up in discussions. I think just this being aware is enough at the start, and then from that you build on to what you already know and share with others.
soft power has lots of power. I guess that's the point. I'll go to you, Tessel. What's your thoughts?
Oh, it's such a hard question. I think just being educated, educating others, advocating for it. But I think Georgie's question specifically is more of a practical question. So how can, for example, how can we rewild? How can you rewild your own garden? And I think that's such a great place to start as someone who's not involved in, who's not an urban practitioner per se, but does want to make a difference. And I think, yeah, like just by doing it, you're going to learn. I think, unfortunately, public space is a more complicated realm. You need to, yeah, it's higher levels of implementation, but I think start small, I guess.
Tessa, I'm going to give over to you, but I know it's already 1 o'clock. So if you have to leave, you have to leave. Just a kind reminder, this will be recorded. I hope the panelists can stay because there's a lot of comments and questions being popped. Tessa, what's your take on that? I mean, it's both practical and more of a holistic questions in terms of our ideas versus society's perception towards green infrastructure.
I'll respond briefly just in terms of my project. So I would say use your power as a consumer if you have the means, buy locally, support local small-scale farmers. Don't just go to the Oranje City Farm Market, visit the PHA, get to know the PHA. It's a really beautiful space and it should be celebrated.
Yeah, I'm very guilty of that, going to the Rhinoceros market, I must admit. So don't tell anyone I said that. Obviously, Lauren asked again, has these projects been presented to the city? I assume that's a no, or does anyone have an answer to that? So we'll go on to that. So maybe that's an application. Obviously, it's elections coming up on Monday. I hope everyone's audience is enrolled to vote. But we'll go to the next comment from Sadia. She's saying she loves all the pieces of research. I will agree on that. So the question is, how do we encourage rewilding when the tendency is towards hard public spaces, which is easier to maintain for the municipalities? So I guess there's perception towards the monetary or the role of hard versus green infrastructure. How do we change these perceptions? It's a great question. I'll go to you, Tessel, because you've worked in you're working in local government.
I mean, it's really difficult. It taps into what I was saying earlier about it not really being a priority, and the more convenient and the cheaper option is always what I've found has been pushed. But I think it's also about educating that these interventions will result in in better outcomes. Cheaper outcomes for those who are implementing it. And I think there's not enough education about what effect this can have, and changing the mindset, because the municipalities I've worked with don't see the value of it. It's really about pushing for the cheapest option.
Yeah, Thozama, and you're, I mean, great question, Tessel. And Thozama, I mean, you have your own private practice. What's your experience working with government around this?
Maintenance is always the big one. Why do we need to plant shrubs or ground covers? Who's going to maintain it? It's always back and forth, but you need to be persistent. I think often you need to take a step further when presenting as well, perhaps show the benefits of your vegetation, what vegetation is available. We have many different types of plants within South Africa. We're quite lucky to have quite a wide range. Those benefits that they are easily maintained, and honestly, that value that it brings to the community, to the space. I think we just need to take that step further in educating.
It's all about persistence, like you were saying earlier. Tessa, what's persistence? Don't give up. Tessa, over to you.
Just to add to the matter of maintenance, because this is a recurring issue in the planning realm, the maintenance of public spaces. And I think one of the best solutions is, again, to embed the community in the landscape. So yeah, create ownership among the local community to maintain a green space. So a really great example is in Seawinds in Cape Town. They created a medicinal street garden with indigenous plants, and the local traditional healers were responsible for maintaining that garden. So examples like that, where the people are in relationship with the landscape and maintaining it is in their best interest, it creates kind of this symbiotic relationship where it's not just the responsibility of the municipality to maintain a space.
Definitely, it's both individual, incremental, but also holistic, because we do need urgency. And yet, yes, individuals, but we need everyone, every government agency, civil society. I think Daniel kind of summarized it quite beautifully, and just touching on Tessa's presentation about kind of short market interest and commercial interest. And this is something that planners in most spaces, not just around rewilding and green infrastructure faces around the kind of democratization of planning. It's chaos, isn't it? Across the councils, not just in Cape Town, but across the country. Tessel, you have your hand up, please. Over to you.
I do. I want to respond to that quickly. I was just saying that it's also a form of job creation at the end of the day. And I want to illustrate with a really nice example of my neighborhood in Cape Town in Greenpoint. There is an amazing initiative by a volunteer. She's retired, and she has basically optimized the small lanes that go from the mountain down to main road, and planted all of these alleyways. And she often does, twice a week, she does walks in these alleyways to create safer spaces, show the, what's it called? The presence of the community, first of all. And second of all, she works with homeless people to assist her. So it really is about working with the resources and communities, and it really has evolved Greenpoint into this, like community, and everyone looks forward to these walks. And if you haven't been, you definitely must go. It's full of succulents, and they're so beautiful. It's such a nice view of the city. So I think working with the community is such an important thing, and job creation.
Yeah, the government needs to spend, especially State of Cape Town, if you look at their budgetary allocations, priorities, and that's coming up. They need to redo that once we elect new administration. So it'll be very interesting seeing what prevails, and not just here, but across the country. Any last questions from everyone? Bevs is saying education, local buy-in is key. I think that was illustrated from everyone. And then Daniel was saying, organized communities can always help in maintaining green spaces, kind of echoing what Tessel just said. Tessel, if you have any links to that, please share. Just going back to someone's questions about how individuals can be involved in the practicality of it. I think it's, if there's any more questions or any comments, please, now's the time to speak up. Otherwise, I think we'll end it. I mean, what do you guys think? Time to get lunch?
Yes, happy with that. Thank you so much, everyone.
Perfect.
Thank you.
On behalf
thanks
of...
so much for such an engaging discussion, and thanks to my co-panelists. It was so interesting hearing your ideas.
Thanks, everyone.
The recording, it will be recorded. On behalf of Young Openers, Our Future Cities, and the South African Cities Network, and all the panelists, thank you for coming. Excellent presentations. Hope you guys can potentially share these presentations with the audience. Maybe we can do that on social media. Just a quick thought on my side, but it will be recorded. Please reach out to them. We need support and cooperation and collectivism, and we're not alone. We're a young generation, and we can make a difference. There's still possibilities. Shall we end the call?
Cool. Thank you so much.
I
Yeah.
know it's very awkward. You know, when do you end it? You just press the button. Shall we do it? Okay, I'm doing
Have
it.
a good
Okay, sorry, I'm
Friday.
very awkward.
Bye.
Bye everyone.
Bye.
Ciao.